For years, the Tesladin has been a fringe build, a solution in search of an actual problem. These builds are expensive, and oftentimes other Paladin variants were better for any given task. Until now, Terror Zones might have made a couple of fan-favorite Paladin builds the new best-in-class setups for reaching 99 the fastest. We're going to show you the brand new setup based on these 2.5 changes for the Tesladin and the Auradin. And I'll even show you some items that you probably didn't even know were good. Literally nobody has these for trade. Item websites, JSP, Tradery, nowhere. Before you see them, be sure to let me know what you think these items are down in the comments. Let's start by looking at the key differences between the Tesladin and the Auradin. The Tesladin utilizes the Holy Shock aura from items like Dream, while the Auradin uses the Holy Fire aura from items like Dragon. Both of these builds tend to be a bit on the expensive side, and even the budget versions of these that we'll talk about are no exception. Because of Sunder Charms in patch 2.5, these builds no longer run into the hard stops that they did before. Monster immunities were a pain point for these types of dins, so many players tried to diversify their damage with items like Grief and Max Damage Charms. But now, we don't have to. In the spirit of build diversity, we no longer need as much build diversity. Let me show you what I mean. Because all monster immunities can now be broken with Sunder Charms, we can completely commit to lightning damage on the Tesladin. This completely changes things and paves the way for a completely new version of this build. Let's start by checking out the new weapon. Crescent Moon may be the new best in-slot item for this din. With this weapon, Conviction, and a Sundering Charm, lightning damage will make an absolute joke out of nearly any monster in the game. Conviction is our main aura, and it can reduce a monster's resist by up to 150%. In combination with the Sunder Charm, that still leaves the monster with negative 55 light res, but Crescent Moon reduces it by an additional 35%, making the monster go from completely immune to negative 90 lightning resist. The lowest that a monster can possibly be is negative 100%, and that's certainly what most monsters will be. Zeal is our main attack, and Crescent Moon will cast Static Field while you're swinging away. This is great in a lot of Terror Zones for AoE and faster clear times at higher player difficulties. And because we can completely commit to lightning damage, we can also move away from the traditional max damage charms in the Tesladin inventory. Get ready for the new best in slot charms, boys. And by get ready, I mean, you better save up. These are shocking small charms of storms and are extremely rare. These are actually similar to 451 poison charms in the sense that they can only be found from monsters with high enough eye levels. Luckily, you can find these a lot easier in the new Terror Zones after you reach level 88. At that point, most monsters will be able to drop these. Additionally, we can move away from armors like Fortitude, opting for more mobility with Enigma. This allows the Tesladin to smash through the new Terror Zones with blatant disregard for their density. The aura is still strong enough though to 1 or 2 shot most mobs if you want to charge through a more desirable Terror Zone on a lower player difficulty. One thing this build is not meant for though is big bosses. While I don't suggest doing Uber Tristram specifically with this guy, if you do, you can actually switch to Kingslayer in your stash, and you'll find that this works a lot better than other items like Last Wish. Don't ask me why. It just does. It's likely because of the open wounds though. Even though Last Wish has prevent monster heal, bosses seem to start healing eventually after you hit them. Open wounds prevents that from happening and does damage along the way. But this build is not meant for Tristram. It's designed to rip through these new Terror Zones and quickly kill groups of monsters that all possess similar eye levels to Diablo himself. When you reach at least level 92, every single monster that spawns in these Terror Zones is like a mini Diablo with regard to experience. So a build like this can get a lot of residual kills that you don't even need to be close to monsters for. Here's a quick look at the rest of the gear. I've put a max roll link in the description for the Tesladin if you'd like to take a further look at the details of this build. Additionally, I've included the closest thing to a budget version of this, which will still rip through Terror Zones pretty well. A Mana Leech ring will easily make up for the fact that our Mercenary isn't using Insight. And speaking of which, the Mercenary can serve as an insane complementary piece to this build. On this one, we've put Last Wish and Grief. As you can see, the Merc is our only source of diversified damage, but he's mostly useful for his life tap. On high player difficulties, this will help keep you alive. We also do something a bit different with our skill points. Since we give up attack rating in our charms now, we'll need to make up for that. We don't need the physical damage from Zeal anymore either, so we can do something different with those synergy skill points. We max Zeal because of the attack rating aiming bonus, and then we put the rest of our points into Blessed Aim. This skill passively increases your attack rating. You don't even need to have the skill active. As for the rest of the skills, we max both of the synergies for Holy Shock, get Conviction to negative 150 to enemy resistance, and put 1 point into Holy Shield. We put just enough into Dexterity to achieve max block, and the rest into Vitality. While this build can do players 8 Terror Zones pretty easily, if you're a filthy casual like me, you'll often find yourself doing P1 runs. But if you just enjoy casually MFing while you're getting to 99 most efficiently, this is perfectly fine. All the gameplay footage in this video was done on players 8, but if we dial back to players 3, you can sort of get a look at what it would feel like in terrorized areas on P1. This build is savage. There's likely not a Paladin build that's faster at clearing these zones. Or is there? Let's take a look next at the Auradin. I believe this version is what I'll be building the next time I want to level a Paladin in terror zones. Admittedly, the mobility of this build isn't as good as the Tesladin because we do give up Enigma, but as long as you're not in Act 3 jungle areas, it really doesn't matter that much. But to make up for this, we've focused on different types of gear. We don't really need skills on our amulet, and since mobility is the priority in these terror zones with this build, we actually use Cat's Eye for the faster run walk. Along those same lines, we don't need cast on our helm. So a 232 open socket helm is perfect and helps us move a lot faster. And believe it or not, these things are actually a lot cheaper than you might think. You'll want to put 2 fire facets in this though. With a Sunder Charm, Conviction, and negative res from Hand of Justice and these jewels, no monster will ever have more than negative 85 fire resistance. While Laying of Hands is good versus demons in this game, you're not always going to run into demons in terror zones, and that's why we use Crushing Blow for these gloves instead. The belt slot is also a very good place to make up for your resistances that you lose with this build. You could stack up different belts to switch out to depending on the zone that you're in, or if you're on P1, I would just suggest slamming on a Mavs belt because you're probably going to be fine anyway. But speaking of resistances, we do have to use some resistance charms with fire damage to help offset the Sunder Charm. But the big ticket item in the inventory of this build is the Flaming Charm of Incineration. Much like the 451 Poison Charm and the Lightning Charm that we saw before, these two need to be rolled on a charm with a very high eye level. Even if you find ones with lower fire damage though, they're still probably the better choice on this build, as we are completely committing to fire damage in this PVM version. Much like the Tesladin, we max the synergies for our O skill aura, we get Conviction to negative 150%, and then we treat this thing like a zealot. We max Sacrifice first for the added damage, and the rest of our points go into Zeal, although you could do this the other way around for more attack rating with Zeal. For the Merc, we use an A1 Rogue and put Harmony on her for the Vigor aura, increasing our mobility even further. While a Fire Arrow variant for the Mercenary can help with damage, we're the ones clearing most of the game, so just prioritize her survivability as much as you can. The Auradin's passive aura damage is far greater and more consistent than the Tesladin. The PvP setup offers diverse damage and aggressive gameplay. It's also completely legal in most dueling rule sets. But even if you wanted to troll pub games with it, it's also really good for that. In the PvP version, we use max damage charms to complement the fire damage that we already do. The PVM version is a bit different, but in my opinion is far more savage than the Tesladin. Even in terrorized zones with monsters that are typically fire immune, this build one-ticks them in P1 with its aura. And in P8, mobs of monsters fall extremely quickly. If you're off on your own in P8 games, you should breeze through them pretty quickly with Zeal, but a group will also appreciate your Conviction aura. All links for the various versions of this din, including the budget versions, can be found down below. At the end of the day, it's a Tesladin and an Auradin, so you can only be so budget with that. Which version of this Paladin do you dream of building? Pun definitely intended. Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like on the video if you made it this far and subscribe for more D2 content.